our next guest, I've got a memento from our next guest right there, from her ghost walks that she hosts here in Burlington, Vermont, and also in Montpelier. And she's been a guest on Amber Live before, but we wanted her back for Halloween. Please welcome Thea Lewis. Hi, Thea.
Hey, it's so wonderful to be here.
Oh my goodness, you must be so bummed this time of year, and you're not able to do what you do.
It's really been tough. And I realized just the other day, because we usually present Rocky Horror Picture Show every year.
Yes.
And this would have been our 10th year.
Oh
and
my
we've
goodness.
been planning
Hold on a second. I just lost sound.
Ooh.
Ooh, maybe it was the ghost.
You never know. Whenever I'm in doubt, I always attribute it to a ghost because it's very likely. It's absolutely likely.
Or some spirits.
Some spirits. Oh.
So Thea, yes, normally you have your ghost tours, you do the Rocky Horror. So what have you been doing to occupy yourself?
Well, I'm working on a novel right now. It's a non-haunted novel, and it's a novel that starts its story back in the 1960s and works its way through several decades. So that's been keeping me occupied. That and my great big cuddly dog Phantom. He's 95 pounds of love, and COVID or no COVID, he still needs a walk 3 times a day.
So you get back to your book. So if it's not about being haunted, what's it about?
It's not. It's about a young woman in Louisiana back in the 1960s who finds herself in a family way. And of course, back in the mid-60s, an unmarried woman, especially a teenage woman, pregnant was not a thing that people wanted to talk about. She was from the South, so that would naturally give anybody just a case of the vapors. And it did her mother, who packed her off to the closest institution for unwed mothers that she could. And this young girl who's just full of, sort of spit and vinegar, plans to give her baby up for adoption. But when she finds that he is born with a pretty profound disability, she decides that she's going to keep him and raise him herself. The rest of the book is about their adventures, and sometimes it's the mom, Carrie's story, and sometimes it's the son, Argent's story. So we take it from there.
Oh my God, how good. I mean, I just saw where someone said they bought you one of your books from your last visit. You were on our show.
Well, bless them.
They bought the Lakeview Cemetery book. Yes. Oh, and there's another one of your books, Wicked Vermont. Oh my. And so hauntings.
And I have to mention, because some people will ask, Lakeview Cemetery of Burlington, Vermont is not a haunted book, but is filled with so many great Burlington stories. The research was so much fun. I mean, anytime I have a chance to discover what was probably the most prominent lady of the evening in the city of Burlington in the late 1800s and write about her, I'm happy to do that. But so it's not haunted, but my sort of bread and butter is haunted things. And I thought tonight I could give you kind of an abbreviated haunted tour, you and your guests, if you'd like.
Please, come on, do it.
Well, Amber, you've been on the tour. That's right. You've got your button. You're ready to go. You've been on the tour, so you know that I always talk about the fact, we'll start way up on the hill, that the University of Vermont is one of the most haunted colleges in all of New England, possibly all of the United States. 14 presumed haunts, and none tickle my fancy more than the story of Henry at the, way up on the hill. If you look at Converse Hall, it's been wonderfully renovated, but it's still decently spooky. And the story of Henry goes like this. Back in the early 1900s, there was a medical student named Henry, and he was attending University of Vermont, a quiet guy. Father was a doctor, grandfather was a doctor, and of course, people expected that young Henry would follow in their footsteps. Well, as it happened, there was an exam that Henry had just about torn himself apart over. He'd studied and studied, but he really didn't feel that medicine was what he was intended for. He hated to disappoint his family. So, so sad about what his lot might be, he took the exam and he felt like he did miserably. He just felt like a fish out of water studying medicine. So after the exam, he went back to Converse Hall, and the story goes that he was so bereft, he went up into the highest reaches of the building, into the attic, and actually took his life. Now, people were so sad because even though Henry had set himself apart, he was a nice enough young man, and people were so upset with this sacrifice. And they were even more upset when the examination grades came out and it was discovered that Henry had aced his exam. Now, since Henry's death, people have talked about very peculiar things happening at Converse Hall. And my favorite story is the story of a young woman who was living there back in the 1980s. Now, this young woman went through a period of time, her second semester, having a terrible, terrible cold. She missed quite a few days of school, and she got used to being in her little apartment at Converse Hall and watching her daytime programs. And it was so cold outside, she kind of hated to leave. So when she got better, she thought she would maybe stay, now that she felt well, tucked inside under a blanket, watching her soaps for another day. Well, she went back into her room after she poured herself some orange juice, and she began to get all snuggled up when all of a sudden she heard a tremendous ruckus out in the other room. Well, she went out to see what could be going on, and every piece of furniture in that room was stacked up on top of the little table she had there in kind of a funny pyramid. She went into her room and she got dressed and she slung her backpack over her shoulder and she left. So we're going to go down the hill now. We're going to go to Mansfield Avenue and the fire station that we know as Station 3. You're familiar?
Oh, yes.
Oh, Station 3 is a wonderful old fire station, and it's got one of those great hose towers. You know, the firefighters used to come back and have to hang those hoses, their hoses, yes. They used to have to hang their hoses up in the top of those towers and let them dangle down so they would dry. Well, this is a decently old fire station, and the stories go that the team of horses that used to carry the firefighters to a fire would often, when they would get the alarm to go to a fire, already be dressed and ready to go. On one such occasion, the firefighters heard the bell ring, got downstairs. Not only were the horses ready to go, they were beside themselves waiting to get out the door. And when they flung open the door to let the horses free out into the street, they saw that the building that was ablaze was right across the road. Now, the best story about Station 3 is a story that I got from a firefighter in Burlington named Pete Walsh. He's a great guy, and all of Burlington's firefighters have such wonderful stories. I have to credit Pete and a firefighter who's since passed away, David Gale, and also Jim Woodman, who we call Woody, with a lot of the tales that I've told on my tours. So what Pete told me was there is a particular bed at Station 3 where they like to let the rookies sleep, because that's the bed, if you lie in it, you're probably going to wake up about 3 o'clock in the morning feeling like someone very cold, someone you can't see, is trying to get into bed with you.
It's been a long pandemic, Thea. Where's that bed?
Oh, gosh. Now, if we have time, I'll go on and take you down into the middle of town. Okay.
Yes.
So, no haunt could be more. People ask me so much of the time, what's your favorite haunt, Thea? And I have so many, but a place that's near and dear to my heart, especially after this Lakeview Cemetery book, is a building that was built by John J. Flynn, the magnificent Flynn Theater, which you, Amber, and I have both spent lots of time in. Now, the Flynn is such a great building. Unfortunately, back in the 1970s, it had kind of fallen into disrepair, and a wonderful group, Lyric Theater Company, and a group of historic preservationists, well, they resurrected it and brought it back to its current glory. But even though it's a wonderful place to sit and enjoy some theater or enjoy some live music, I love it because of its ghosts, particularly a ghost who's made so many appearances that we simply call him by one name, the Flynn Ghost. Now, one of my favorite stories about the Flynn Ghost is the story of a couple of gentlemen who worked with the Lyric Theater Company. They were volunteers. And back in the 1990s, they were working, helping Lyric move in a show. It was a Saturday morning, and these guys were raring to go, but things kept interrupting them as they got to their main task of setting up a scenery grid. I don't know what happened, but somehow, all day long, things dragged on. There were interruptions. They were called to other tasks until finally All the other volunteers had gone home, and here are these two gentlemen working way up high, 50 feet above the Flynn stage. It was late, about midnight, and one of the guys heard somebody call his name. Naturally, he looked over to his friend, the only other person in the building by that time, and he said, "What do you want?" His friend looked back at him and said, "What do you want?" He said, "Well, you called my name is all." His friend said, "Dude, I didn't call your name. I don't know what you got going on over there. But over here, working. Come on, I'm exhausted. Don't you want to go home?" Well, these two guys were in their regular lives, two no-nonsense IBM engineers. And that guy knew that if he didn't just go ahead and, put a shush on it, it would be nothing but nyet, nyet, nyet from his friend for the rest of the night. So quietly, he went back to work. But about 5 minutes later, wouldn't you know it, it happened again. He very clearly heard someone call out his name. Only this time, there was a difference. Because this time, when he looked over at his friend, he could see his friend had heard it too. And they both swiveled their heads at the same time to the left-hand brick wall beyond them, and they couldn't believe what they saw. There, they said, sitting, except that he was floating, 50 feet above the Flynn stage, was a man wearing gray workers' coveralls and dusty boots. They said he looked so casual, as though he were sitting on a park bench. And he stared at the gentleman, and they stared completely goggle-eyed back at him. And then he tipped an imaginary hat, and he was gone, off like a prom dress. Well.
So any idea who this person was?
Well, what we think, because of the historical records we have been able to find, is that John J. Flynn was feeling a little bit pressured back in 1930. I don't know if you've seen the historical photos, Amber, but there were banners hung over the streets saying, Flynn Theater, yes, Flynn Theater opening soon. And people that I've talked with who know about construction say that even though John J. Flynn had particular crews working on the theater, as time got close, the foreman of those crews might have said, Mr. Flynn, we can get this finished just a little bit faster. If we call in this guy, he's really good, he's very dependable. And we think that it might have been an undocumented person working on the crew who fell from a great height and landed on the stage. And so the Free Press has no record of this gentleman. It seems to me to make sense. My tour guide's intuition tells me that it's something that Mr. Flynn would really not have wanted to make public. So whenever I go into the Flynn Theater and I'm seated, I look up and I look around and I just kind of give a little wink to that ghost.
Oh my, how exciting. Thank you. Thank you so much, Thea, for your stories. And I can't wait to read your books and see you some more often. So thank you very much, Thea. We'll be back for the quiz.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, and knowing those places makes it even scarier.